Good afternoon. My name is Zaha, editor-in-chief of Vogue Russia. Today I'm going to moderate this session, going upwards skyscrapers and business districts as variables of city competitiveness. Today with us we have Sergei Kuznetsov, chief architect of Moscow, Alexei Dubashin from Cross, and online we'll be joined by Christos Pasas, director of Zaha Hadid Architects, and Anna Schindler, Director of Urban Development from Zurich. She will have a video that she has sent, and Kenneth Lindgren, Managing Director of Cone, Russia. Let's start with Sergei. Recently, we have published this Vogue Living publication, and we spoke with Sergei, and we said that high-rise buildings were an important trend for the development of cities. We don't want the cities to forever go sideways, but there are all sorts of questions regarding skyscrapers or high-rise buildings, whether to build them or not. Some countries do build them. China stopped building them. What is the situation in Russia or in Moscow, and what do you think about it? Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I hope you will launch the presentation. Moscow going up. And it is true that this is a good question. There are all these debates going on, how human beings need to live in smaller houses on the rather low level, and there's lots of literature about it. They say that skyscrapers are the result of voluntary decisions of some individual developers or owners, and the human beings don't need them. But in the first slide, I show you some of the star metropolises, star cities, how they develop. With a few exceptions, we will see that, of course, these are all densely developed cities, and they also use skyscrapers, or they have used high-rise buildings over the years of their development, like the city of New York. When we talk about Moscow, here's part of the Moscow map without the new territories, but most of Moscow is shown here. The city keeps developing. In the last 100 years, our population increases 1% per year, approximately. So the question is how to support the living conditions of the population. What do we need to do? Where do we place the necessary city functions? And on top of reasonable density means that we need high-rise buildings. There are no other options. Urban theories or theories of urbanism, they may criticize skyscrapers, but at the same time, when cities turn into huge suburban areas, this is also counterproductive. It's difficult in terms of infrastructure, economic efficiency. You cannot provide those suburbs with all necessary infrastructure, sports, healthcare, and so on. Only a rather compact city can develop efficiently, giving enough life quality to its residents. And here we show the points of growth. All cities are different. Sometimes you can increase density and the number of high-rise buildings. And in Moscow, we have our own hotbeds where we build high-rise buildings. But Moscow fits the idea of high-rise buildings very well, starting with bell towers and Stalin skyscrapers. In terms of our composition and urban development and logic, it all fits nicely. Here in Moscow, we have city and the greatest city areas which we are developing rapidly. These are new city centers, the points of growth, points of power, some of the areas along the river.
Да, я просто пытаюсь говорить и в камеру, и в микрофон. Да, это слайды, которые у нас не только построенного.
These are some of the slides of the current and future city locations. It's not just about high-rise residential buildings, but it's also about the quality development of the urban environment. A couple of new examples or something that's in the making. The Southport on the river, which is about creating a new urban center in what we call the southern or south river port. We are going to have some river transportation routes there. And we have just finished a major international contest or tender for that site. We are selecting the finalists, and there are also projects going on in the North River Port. There are new intensive development areas where we build new residential buildings, and Zaha Hadid Architects is another such cases or successful examples for the development of the territory. And we can use high-rise buildings fairly well and nicely. This was my last slide. This is how we're going, and thank you very much. Thank you, Sergey. Is Christos online or not? Will we be able to see him?
К нам подключается Christos Passos.
We have Christos Passos, director of Zaha Hadid Architects, and now I would like to really see him on the screen to ask him a question. Good afternoon, Christos. We are really glad to see you. Unfortunately, you are not physically with us in Moscow. Let's hope to meet one day offline. Zaha Hadid Architects already worked in Moscow, and now you have other plans here. What brought you here, and what are the challenges that Moscow gives you, and what are your tasks here in the city?
Well, we've been involved in the Russian market, and also particularly in Moscow for the past 15 or 20 years. The Russian culture and also the environment in Moscow and other big cities is one with which we are both intellectually and emotionally engaged in. We believe that we are in a position to positively contribute to the dialogue that is ongoing. It's a very fertile, very interesting dialogue, and we're very proud to be part of it. At the same time, we have several projects that are going on, such as the Technopark in Skolkovo, an investigation on the new workspace ecology for the 21st century. We finished a couple of projects like the Dominion Plaza and the Doronin Villa. We are looking into different projects like the Southport Master Plan, but also more importantly, a beautiful new project in collaboration with Crost. And I would love to be able to tell you a little bit more about that today.
Мы включаем презентацию.
Shall we turn on the presentation?
Yeah, sure. So basically, as I said before, we're very heavily involved in the transformation of urban environments and housing across the world, and in particular in Russia and in Moscow, where I'm heading our Russian projects. Let's say our work in the Russian region ranges from buildings that are private or office headquarters to proposals for the Moscow facade renovation program, to the project in Skolkovo for Sberbank, but also proposals which are trying to push the boundaries of what urban living can be In this particular case, the territory we worked on as part of the Moscow renovation program in Kuzminki. Also, visionary proposals for a business and cultural center on Marshal Zhukova Street, but also as part of the engagement for smart cities, proposals for the Rublevo-Arkhangelsko area, where we're exploring the idea of a three-dimensional skyscraper, or a kind of a building that becomes a city in itself. We're also engaged in the designing of infrastructure, such as the metro station in Klenovi Boulevard, and also several residential buildings where we're looking and studying together with various clients and competition organizers how the new generation of office and residential buildings can be. More specifically, in this particular case, I would like to present to you the project, the so-called District 82. It's a technocratic term, but it's basically a micro-district in the Horoshevo-Menevniki area. And it is a pioneering approach where we're looking at the whole of this territory as a unified, integrated approach for a new type of living. And let me say a couple of things about this. The project is basically consisting of a series of facilities on the ground floor, incorporated within an interesting and complex podium, and at the same time, a series of 5 towers of varying heights is beginning to take form on top of it, completing in a way both the kind of the social sphere of the project, but also the private living that goes into it. The project is one characterized by a 3-dimensional layering of the forms. On the ground level, we spend a considerable amount of time trying to see how to break, in a way, the podium, to perforate it, to make it more open. On top of that, there is a low-rise podium band that includes a very diverse, rich mix of programs for anything ranging from community centers to small theaters, to libraries, co-working spaces, maybe low-cost, affordable housing, and of course a more luxury component at the top, which are the 5 towers themselves. On the ground floor, a very interesting and sculptural treatment of the ground sphere, not only frames the streets around, providing access on all of the facades all around, but also has significant gaps in between that are aiming to draw the public of the region into a territory that is characterized by an urban park, a series of public spaces for outdoor or indoor events, as well as commercial and retail facilities. And an aspect like this can be very much implemented in Moscow. We think it's very realistic and also very much needed to look at the different layers, not only concentrate at the towers, but also the different layers of the podium that bring different types of users together. But of course, following on what Sergei Oskarovich mentioned earlier, the towers themselves also bring a certain amount of density to the particular area. They invigorate the commercial and the social aspect here. So all of it together must be seen as a combination of forces, so low-rise and high-rise living combined. It shouldn't be a question of either or, but it should be a question of both ends. So the podium plays an important role as much as the towers themselves do. But beyond this, I think it's also interesting to see that different people have different needs. An open plan office space, for example, can occupy a large part or portion of this band. And I think this also gives the developer flexibility in how they move into the future. So as a component and a possibility, it gives them the flexibility to subdivide and to customize this product in different ways. Beyond that, I think we also begin to see that the intervention or the vertical positioning of the different sets of towers and cores gives the possibility to have this ring to operate as a unifying element for the whole constellation of components consisting in this integrated design. The towers themselves are in varying heights. The proposal is that, of course, each one of them has its own level, and of course, on top of all of these terraces, there is also a possibility to create a series of green parks or green roofs that are accessible to the residents or the users of this particular area, creating gaps between the forms so that there is ample air and ventilation, but also the possibility to use some of those terraces for events and other uses. So imagine this as a landscape, as a sculpture on which you can walk on the different levels and you can discover different points of view within the city. And of course, the towers themselves, the tower as a typology has always been seen as a sort of symbol and also as an engineering accomplishment. I would like to propose that towers nowadays, that they have, I believe they've reached an optimum in their engineering, in their engineering design. But we would like to propose another thing as well here, that towers can also be very beautiful buildings that can be very functional from a living or a societal point of view. And in this case, we propose these towers to be, you can imagine them like lanterns, which would glow very calmly in the night sky in Moscow. And of course, the way this can be achieved is through the idea that, we take the traditional bay window, the three-sided window that protrudes out into the street, and we translate it into a modern form, which are these teardrops or these bubbles that you see on the faces of the towers, and these essentially become inflations within the towers, where living rooms and the public zones within the building can inflate. They can become bigger spaces, and they can offer longer views to the skyline of Moscow. So in looking at these plans, I would invite you to see the possibility to create extra terraces, but also to create extra interior spaces within these high-rise units. And let's consider something as well. A tower, everybody speaks about towers usually as to how they are seen from the public sphere, from the street level of a street. And that's fair enough. But I would say that the tower has also considerable internal aspect and an internal perception, where what you see from the tower back into the city is also quite an important part of the experience, the human experience of how the city sees itself. So the tower is not only a kind of a tall symbol, an engineering marvel, but it also has the opportunity to allow us to look at the city back from the top, and that is I always found a very interesting experience. And of course, when one is looking at how to accomplish these things, one has to depend a lot on the latest glass technologies, and also the digital design techniques that enable us to design these things with very good perfection and also precision, but always guided, and our work is always guided by what we call a kind of an artistic integrity. So the object needs to have its own artistic drive, and that is what makes it beautiful in the end. And I think that skyscrapers can be engineering marvels, they can be good symbols, but they should also promote beauty in the city. And I think I would like to believe that you will agree with me when I say that these are beautiful towers, and they bring a lot of that beauty back into Moscow. Of course, glazing and glass technology is something that is ongoing, and its development is very rapid and radical across the world. In places like China and in America, there is a lot of innovation going on. We believe that the Moscow market is now ripe and mature for these kinds of buildings to take shape, and being in partnership or in collaboration or working with Crossed in this particular case enables us to be very confident that we can achieve these kind of new types of residential projects. And if all that beauty can help to also as a side project engage in the project of sustainability and also the project of social cohesion, then we should count ourselves as being very successful in the task that we set for ourselves. So a project that is a unified approach and integrated, but at the same time not homogeneous and not boring, but actually distinct and very varied project that actually allows us to consider how to pioneer high-rise living. And these are my last words, and thank you for your attention.
Спасибо, Christos.
I would like to thank Christos.
Небоскребы находятся на...
Skyscrapers, high-rising buildings are on the top of architecture and architectural trends and technologies and innovations. How to implement that trends? Is it good to work with the Zaha Hadid Architects Bureau? And I would like to involve into our dialogue Alexei Dubashin, General Director of PFK Cross. You ask if it's good to work with Zaha Hadid. I would say it's a very big responsibility. We started to work with them many years ago, and one of their projects, I'm speaking about the Sberbank's project in Skolkovo, nearly 300,000 square meters. That was the project where they were those who inspired the project. We were the providers of the technical solutions, air, light, safety, and so on and so forth. And in our project, we were able to pass the expertise, and that was really very surprising for us. And we had to work with the Asian architects, English architects, and those who work in technology to ensure that this project works. And today we have the following global trend. We do not want to have buildings which are straight and perpendicular. Everyone wants to see something closer to nature, and here we have the examples of different such natural forms. You can see the facades and quarters. Here you can see, for example, the pavilion here in Zaradia, and also Sergei Olegovich is mentioning it right. We need to focus on the idea that historically high-rising buildings is something different. And here you can see the example of green roofs every 100 square meters. This is sufficient area for some leisure time, for a barbecue, and so on and so forth. And this is something what is requested from the city, from people. We are not using anything what is outdated, but we have very difficult multi-level greens everywhere to make sure that those plants are available to people every day. Here is the example which was already demonstrated by Christos. Those are famous photographs. And here is the picture which demonstrates our great past. If you remember, it was good luck for those who moved there to those 5-storied buildings. And I would like to remind you that more than 3,000 towns and villages were ruined during the Second World War. And when we finally had such construction, and when we had millions and millions square meters which were distributed, And people not only had the roof, and they also had the utilities, for example, hot water. But currently we understand that this legacy, and nowadays we need to construct other types of buildings, those buildings which are required by the country, by the city, and of course architects and those who work in social science, they prompt to developers what we need to construct. And Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed today that knowledge of different people and examples of different cities should be taken into account. That was during the presentation of Sergei Olegovich. And we need to dedicate our money not to the residential housing, but to the whole infrastructure. But we need to understand what we mean by that infrastructure. We need to understand what is a good office, what is a good park, what is a good cinema. Everything should be there. We want to have a concept of a 15-minute city to make sure that all the services received by people are received closely to the place where they live. For example, we worked on ice, and that ice coverage, artificial ice coverage, is operational for 8 or 9 months per year. That's why when we speak about non-residential buildings, we need to make sure that we have interesting examples, for example, dancing clubs, as we have at Zhukova. When we speak about non-residential premises, they should not fulfill only trading functions. It's not only shopping malls. It should be all the other aspects of a social area, dancing, different types of clubs, and so on and so forth. And we also need to make sure that we fulfill Vitrovi's triada: usefulness, then strength and calculation, that's the second part, and then beauty and aesthetics, that's only on the third place. And tomorrow and the day after tomorrow would expect to have totally different solutions. That's why we need to use the up-to-date knowledge, and we need not only to learn ourselves, but we may pay for such knowledge. We may pay to the best people of our globe: futurologists, sociologists, architects, engineers. And one more important idea: we need to construct something not to make people who live nearby suffer, because when we construct something, it is not convenient. We need to be very open. We need to have a constructive dialogue with those who live nearby. But those are just words. And we developed the technology where we cut the period when we construct something twice, so it's 2 times less when people have to suffer. Then we need to switch to robot-assisted plans, which would allow to construct 5, 6, maybe even 7 stores per month. In this case, we will understand how we will be able to construct faster. But to do that, we need to use biotechnology and other new technologies. And at this particular object of construction, we will also use those technologies as an experiment. As far as I understand, we also have a short video. This is also the idea of Christos.
The project is very accessible in real time. An example of a well-defined mixed-use district that takes into account the needs of modern Muscovites from different income levels and features several amenities that make District 82 a commercial and cultural center. Our design approach is one where a close look is given to the relationship between the podium and the ground. This low-rise band, consisting of 3 to 4 stories, undulates around the site, creating a necklace onto which 5 towers are resting. The central space features good quality retail, theatre and film screens, a multimedia and community center, a library, and a small museum. The project aspires to be a destination for the near neighborhood and friendly environment. The podium opens out to the district by being lifted off of the ground, making it welcoming and accessible from inside. On upper levels, co-working spaces, affordable housing and offices constitute a rich mix of public facilities that complement quality residential living. Innovation, precise engineering and sustainability are the key drivers behind the design of District 82. Sits together as a unique set, a unified composition of glass blocks rising into the sky up. More importantly, the envelope of these buildings is designed for innovative glazing systems where a series of volumes, inflations are developed onto the facades, exploiting the idea of the traditional bay window on a high-rise building where living rooms and public areas within the apartments inflate toward the outside to allow for wider views into the skyline of Moscow. A project of understated elegance, developed by Zaha Hadid architects for cost, will undoubtedly open new possibilities for sustainable urban living within the southwest quadrant of this vibrant metropolis. The project aims to create several new jobs and contribute to the transformation of metropolitan Moscow into a polycentric urban agglomeration.
Спасибо, Алексей. Спасибо за ролик.
Thank you, Alexei. Thank you for such a nice video. And Anna Schindler had to join us. Unfortunately, she's not able to connect, but she sent us a video with the explanation what is Zurich's attitude to high-rise construction and what are the practices which they use.
Секундная заминка. А может, я пока вопросы задам, хотите?
Probably I would switch to the questions so far while we still have the technical issues. So what pandemic changed both in construction, architecture and our request to the city? Do you think we will have a long-term impact, including impact on high-rise buildings? I think that except for the question which arises more and more often, what changed in architecture, I think it did not, but it doesn't mean that it won't change anything in future, because currently we are not living in the situation of pandemic for such a long period of time, and architecture is an art which requires time and it's quite inertious. And to make sure that we see the impact of pandemic, I think it will have to stay with us for a longer period of time. I hope that won't happen, and I hope that we won't see any specific changes. I hope that we will have the chairs all the time with the social distancing of 1.5 meters. I don't think we will see that. So I will see that the evolution of architecture will continue in the same way. I don't expect to have some changes which are aimed at social distancing, at some obstacles for the communication between people, and so on and so forth. And I think that communication is an integral part of our nature as a biological species. That's why I think that technologies should not prevent such communication, and I hope we won't see such changes. Okay, thank you very much, and I would like to give the floor to Kenneth Lindgren, who is the director of KONE in Russia, who are making the elevators, including the elevators for the high-rising buildings. And actually, that was one of the prerequisites to make sure that skyscrapers can survive. So a few words about the internal part of the skyscraper. The floor is yours.
Hello. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Да. Yes.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Just a moment. Putting it in presentation mode. So, hello, my name is Kenneth Lindgren, and I am the managing director of KONE in Russia. So it's my pleasure to join the Moscow Urban Forum, unfortunately now online, but still a pleasure to be here. I will share with you today a vision about reimagining the office for the future of work. I will focus today on workplaces, which are often key elements of tall mixed-use buildings. I'll start my presentation with a short video.
Are you ready for a connected future? Today, a person carries, on average, at least 4 to 5 connected devices. They allow us to communicate, work, and entertain, sometimes without the touch of a button. And that's just the start. Connectivity enables the creation of completely new experiences, from fridges to lights, and from windows to central heating. The average household has at least 10 to 17 connected devices. That number will rise. Buildings everywhere are becoming smart. The various systems within buildings are increasingly integrated. They already communicate with the devices we carry. This enables seamless and intuitive people flow experiences in our urban world. Most of us live in cities, and our numbers are rising. In coming years, how we connect in urban hubs will become the foundation of the human experience. Worldwide, we now have over 30 billion connected devices. By 2025, that number will reach 75 billion. Can you sense the future? It's connected.
Shortly about KONE. KONE has been enabling smooth people flow for over a century, and today our solutions move over 1 billion people per day. In a week, that's the equivalent of the entire population of the world. And our solutions can be seen in many of the world's iconic high-rises, such as the Shard in London, CITIC Tower in Beijing, and Marina Bay Sands in Singapore. But also many high-rise towers in Moscow city, such as, for instance, Neva Towers, Naberezhny Towers, Gorod Stolits Tower, Imperia Tower, and Eurasia Tower. If we then look at office, we all know that remote work has become an acceptable norm. When employees return to office, we see already that they are challenging the traditional office experience, physical layout, interactions, and movement of people. Employees are asking, why should I return to office? Why not continue to work from home? This means new, higher expectations on the convenience, comfort, well-being, and sustainability of working environments, such as Christos was also talking about. We believe that it's unlikely that majority of employees will not return to office at all after the pandemic. Offices will continue to be in demand, but need to be transformed from location for work to employee-centric, purposeful experience spaces. Ones that enhance collaboration and innovation. Space that's flexible, fit for purpose, workplaces that are part of solutions towards sustainability. To empower this transformation, we at KONE, together with Accenture and Amazon Web Services, have come together to engage the broader industry. To build the vision, we have had several dialogues with different office stakeholders, employees, tenants, building owners, and managers. What is common for all parties is that the goal to take the recent learnings from the pandemic and turn them to long-term solutions. As already said, for employees, the key question has arisen: why to work from office? The workplace needs to invite you to work, join your colleagues, access superior resources. The office will serve as a platform for collaboration and innovation. For employers and tenants, the office will become a networking platform, a place to build and help organizations, a place where the company culture comes to life, attracts and retains talent, and develops the employer brand. For building owners and managers, return on investment in the changing environment with lower number of people in offices is key. New opportunities to maintain or even increase their revenue streams, either via new services or business models, including outcome-based offerings and sustainability-driven tools and capabilities. In addition, sustainability is an important driver for owners, both to make the expectations for their investors as well as tenants and their employees. So our vision explores 4 ways in which the reimagined office will be brought to life. Firstly, redefining user experience. Secondly, redesigning spaces. Thirdly, reinventing office as a service. And fourthly, rethinking sustainability. Due to limited time today, I will take a closer look only into user experience, but would be happy, of course, to discuss other in a one-on-one after this session. So, looking into user experience will be at the center of the future office, with all spaces and solutions helping users focus on what matters, transforming work into real personalized experiences. So what if the office could learn from your behavior and provide specific solutions and experiences that are unique to you? Imagine an office that provides its users with unparalleled convenience and a purposeful, frictionless, personalized work experience. Enabling a sense of flow, it guides employees to focus on what matters. Your movement in the office is completely intuitive and effortless, and simultaneously ensures your well-being. The user-centric office of the future recognizes your needs and actively captures your behaviors to create a highly personalized experience. The office will be a space where employees, clients, and visitors enjoy their stay and are supported every minute of their day. So when we look at KONE and how we started to look at new innovations for future offices, we started by focusing on our users and customers. We conducted dozens of interviews, co-creation workshops, user experiments, and user testing across the world. We looked at intuitive, personalized experience. And looking at now, we identified many of what has been accelerated by the pandemic. Touchless access, improved guidance, need for adaptability and flexibility. This has then guided the decision we have done in engineering and in the design of our solutions for offices. So with this kind of an approach, co-creating with users and customers, we have been able to create solutions that help elevate user experience. Technology is the enabler and carefully applied to achieve this. So digital customization is a key opportunity to personalize and adapt. So we believe the office can be an irresistible but highly efficient and sustainable experience. Let's create this together and let's reimagine the office of the future and contribute to both the vision and its implementation. With this, I want to thank you. Let's continue to reimagine the office.
Спасибо, Кеннет. Отличный план. Мы тоже хотим.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. We also want sustainable and organization of offices and comfortable offices. And now we're back to our video from Anna Schindler.
When you talk about skyscrapers, you have the skyline of New York, of Chicago, or London in mind. The highest building in New York, for example, is the One World Trade Center, which rises 541 meters into the sky. In Zurich, we talk about different scale. Our highest building is the Prime Tower with a height of 127 meters. We are small cities, and our skyscrapers correspond to that scale. This fact is important to keep in mind to understand. Skyscraper is a building that is located in or around the city center, and it doesn't belong to the periphery. This interpretation is in contradiction with the conception of the 1960s and 1970s urban planning policy, when the majority of skyscrapers were placed on green fields outside the city centers. But Zurich doesn't want any satellite communities of skyscrapers. For this reason, settlement areas which are separated from the urban area by a green space were and are excluded as high-rise areas, because Zurich wants to protect its viewpoints. Also excluded are topographically sensitive and preferred residential areas such as hillsides and places with a view. Another key point of Zurich's guideline is that the lake shore has to be kept clear from skyscrapers. The charisma and the presence of the lake shouldn't be put in competition with skyscrapers. Furthermore, skyscrapers are also excluded from the old town. The skyscrapers areas marked out in the zoning plan, as you see in this picture, differ a lot in their development structure. According to the criteria of urban structure, of traffic access, development potential, and usage structure, 3 skyscraper areas were defined. Depending on the area, the requirements for skyscrapers differ. In the first area, the existing urban structure is large scale and open. The maximum height of a skyscraper is 80 meters. In the second area, the existing urban structure differs in terms of structure and scale. The maximum height is again 80 meters. And in the third area, the existing urban structure is homogeneous with concise urban neighborhood typology at the medium scale. There, the maximum height is only at 40 meters. In the study, Acceptance of Urban Density from 2016, around half of the 1,000 people surveyed in Zurich answered positively to the question of whether they could imagine living in a skyscraper or if they liked skyscrapers in urban situations. And in various studies, it is repeatedly expressed that there is an obvious discrepancy between the positive internal and negative external perception of a skyscraper. In general, the population living near skyscrapers likes them, but other ones don't. To keep this positive view that the people of Zurich have of skyscrapers in the city, Zurich has to find ways to integrate skyscrapers in the existing urban landscape. How do we do that? The first essential aspect of skyscrapers is their location and the context of the urban structure. First of all, this depends on the topography and the landscape around the planned skyscraper. Every city has to define for itself which factors are important to consider when building skyscrapers, as they have a strong impact on the city silhouette and there is a risk of negative influence on the landscape view. But skyscrapers can also be landmarks and points of orientation within a city. There is a very important difference between residential and business skyscrapers, which has to be considered in the planning process. The requirements to a residential skyscraper are much higher and more diverse than to a strictly business skyscraper, where the ground floors and the space around the entrance is much less public than private. From an economic point of view, skyscrapers make no sense. They are more expensive to build and operate, and they require more complex planning than a conventional construction with exactly the same density. The construction costs are estimated to be from 10 to 20% higher for a skyscraper than for a conventional building. And the higher the degree of utilization of the floor plan and the lower the number of areas for allotment and building services is, the more profitable a skyscraper is. And the sooner, thanks to the high yield usable areas, especially residential and office spaces, the additional structural costs for statics, for development technology, for fire protection, and so on, and higher planning costs are balanced. The Planning and Building Act of the Canton of Zurich stipulates that skyscrapers have to be a structural benefit and must be architecturally carefully designed. However, this affects, for example, outside space, ground floor, architectural quality, or public uses. In the city of Zurich, this process is accompanied by a professional committee, the Baukollegium. When we group several skyscrapers together, a development focus or a new center, a so-called cluster of skyscrapers, can be created. An overall concept specifies the design for the whole group. This has to be done in consideration with the immediate surroundings and public outdoor space. With a single high-rise, as you see here in this picture, special attention can be consciously given to a specific location, to a specific place, or to a specific company. From an urban planning point of view, this reason to build a skyscraper is different and is difficult because the solitaire has a very strong impact on the neighborhood and the landscape view. But on the other hand, with their often distinctive and eye-catching building shapes, solitaires are particularly good to form a concise conclusion to a building area or to a neighborhood, as well as to emphasize the edge of a settlement or a center. As you see here in this picture, this skyscraper really emphasizes the edge of its building lot, and defines also a place that before was just no man's land. Depending on the use, a further differentiation can then be made between public, for instance, hospital, school, administration building, viewing platform, semi-public, for instance, restaurants, cinema, hotel rooms, common rooms, and private use, for instance, apartments or offices. For residential skyscrapers, hygiene, quality of air, light, the view as well as the quantity and quality of the open spaces around the building are important. While in case of office skyscrapers, it is primarily the functionality of the rooms as well as the good accessibility which are essential. There are also requirements from an ecological and social perspective. From an ecological point of view, skyscrapers use more energy in their maintenance because they tend to have much more electronic infrastructure than a common building, like more elevators or lifts, more electric supply for fire protection, air conditioning, and so on. In Zurich, we have restrictive laws concerning the distance between a skyscraper and the building next to it. So a skyscraper is a soil-consuming way to build in Zurich. It's no way to create density. Furthermore, a skyscraper in Zurich has to be built so that it doesn't shade any building around for longer than 2 hours a day. Another ecological impact of skyscrapers on the environment are the fall winds that appear when the cold air entering the city hits the skyscraper. These fall winds can be so strong that it's barely impossible to stay outside near the skyscraper. Especially in connection with densification, the social aspects and effects to the social neighborhood that the skyscraper has shouldn't be marginalized. In addition to the design of a skyscraper, it is especially its impact on society that influences the opinion of the skyscraper and the acceptance of skyscrapers in society. For residential skyscrapers, the social mixture of the inhabitants as well as the supply of community facilities are essential. In Zurich, we try to achieve this goal by planning a mix of usages in skyscrapers, like affordable and more expensive rents on different floors, community facilities for the inhabitants, but also for the neighborhood, and the ground floor allocated for public uses, for example, dining, shopping, or leisure. The outside spaces around the residential skyscraper have to be planned in a manner that allows a strong connection with its existing neighborhood, when live in its surrounding area, and to add additional social value to the quarter or to the neighborhood. Because living in a skyscraper from a user perspective means living with many people in the same building without the possibility to enter in contact with every neighbor. So living in a skyscraper can be more anonymous than living in an ordinary building. How can we create communities among the users in the skyscraper? And how can we rupture with anonymity? I can give you an example, as you see on this photo. It's outside of the city of Zurich. It's in Zug, a smaller city south of Zurich. But there is a skyscraper that has been made in wood called P. The architects developed an accessibility system that groups several stories together and connects them with the same elevator. In this way, a smaller group of inhabitants uses the same elevator every day, and the possibility to get in touch with each other is higher. Another important point from a user perspective is the existence of public spaces on the ground floor. Here also I have good examples from Zurich this time, the Hadid skyscrapers, as they are called, residential skyscraper cluster from the 1970s that has been renovated in 2007. On the ground floor of one, it's four buildings, and on the ground floor of one is playroom for families with children living in the skyscraper. But, and this is why it's very successful, the playing ground is also well visited by families from the surrounding neighborhood who do not live there, but who connect with the skyscrapers like this. So, the skyscraper we have seen is a type of building that has gained importance during the past years in all of Switzerland, but especially in Zurich. This also because we are talking a lot of, Zurich is a growing city, we're talking a lot about density, and there is this idea, nevertheless, how skyscrapers could be used to create more dense environments. As I said, the current guidelines date from 2001. They are 20 years old. For this reason, Zurich decided to update the skyscraper guidelines. This has to be done under the premise of structural consolidation. This means comparing the guidelines with the current population growth forecasts, as I said, and the associated planning consideration, especially with our new communal structure plan. During this revision that is currently going on, the skyscraper areas as well as their heights and zones will be checked and, if necessary, adjusted. The way in which the city defines the term additional value to the neighborhood or additional value to the city that the skyscraper must create also needs to be examined and maybe to be redefined. In short, the goal is to adapt the skyscraper guidelines to the needs of our growing city in terms of urban planning, of architecture, of urban space, and most important, in terms of social and environmental benefit. Thank you for your attention, and goodbye.
Спасибо, Анне, за такой подробный рассказ. У нас мы немножко
Thank you so
убиваем.
much for such a detailed explanation. We are lagging behind our schedule, but I have questions and I would like to ask them. I would like to say that we have two more questions. I have a question to Alexei and to Christos about the lightning in the skyscrapers on the one hand, and if we need to have the lightning and such intense lightning, taking into account that the light which demonstrates the facade in the evening will be quite organic. Probably I would like to expand that question to ask the following. What is the plan how to make sure that skyscrapers are environmentally friendly? Because I think they consume a lot of energy. When we speak about water at 120th floor, it's very expensive. It's not quite easy to understand how to utilize the garbage and so on. So let's currently focus on the light. As for the lighting of the buildings and skyscrapers, I think we do not need to have very intense light, because when we have the light from the earth towards the sky, it's just a notion that this building is there. And to make sure that we stick to the aesthetics, we need to make sure that this is the professional who works with that. We need to highlight it in the night time to make sure that we pay our attention. As for the internal light, of course, this is something according to the regulations and requirements, something which is comfortable and convenient for those who live there or who work there. Concerning environmentally detrimental way, we speak about concrete, but concrete is an environmental material. This is done from crushed stone, sand, and so on and so forth, and this is natural. And when we demolish the buildings, we ensure that everything is reprocessed, and then we use it as a crushed stone or some other ingredients back in our construction. We might use that, for example, in road construction. That's why when we speak about concrete, it's one of the most environmentally friendly materials. As for the gold water cost, of course, it's something which misleads us. It doesn't really matter at which level we need to pump the water, on the 17th floor or on 100 plus floor. We do not spend a lot. That's why when we speak about engineering construction of the skyscrapers, we do have some difficulties. I think that we need to ensure the vertical transport, first of all, in the form of elevators, and it's very difficult to evacuate people from the building if necessary. And of course, air conditioning is very important, and it is one of the most challenging parts. Do you have some ways to resolve those challenges, those issues? Well, I think it's something which should pass its own evolution. Our well-known companies, higher and other companies, are brilliant, and when they face the requirements of the city and the requirements of the architecture, they resolve them. And of course, we need to have good solutions, because we do not need to drill the walls to install air conditioning units. That's totally wrong. But I think it's not a problem of the high-rising buildings. Of course, nobody is drilling the walls to install the air conditioning units when we speak about skyscrapers. But in general, Moscow and Russia has a good chance for optimization of the high-rising construction. Because if we, for example, compare ourselves with Dubai, and today we also heard some of the comparisons, when we speak about hot climate, it's even more challenging to resolve it, because we know that to heat for 1 degree centigrade is 4 times cheaper than to cool for 1 degree centigrade. And I think it's even better that we have such environmental conditions. But on the other hand, we have different problems. For example, we may have ice freezing and it may fall down afterwards. But anyway, all the technologies which allow to deal with that, they already exist. And if we compare the cost of land, of course, we may say that our expenditures are not so high to stop constructing rising buildings. Thank you. I also have a question to Sergey from Oleg Solovyov. We, in our society, see a great disacceptance of such skyscrapers because they spoil the environment. What should we do to change such perception, to make it positive? It's a very good question. Thank you so much. Indeed, it's actually a mystery for me. Even before I started to learn to study to be an architect, I already back then liked the high-rising buildings, and I analyzed the nature of the high-rising buildings constructions. And in Moscow, we had a lot of ideas, specifically when we speak about avant-garde period, for example, horizontal constructions, you know very well about that. And actually, the high-rising construction ideas were developing, and we always looked at that as an innovative, up-to-date movement. But indeed, at some period of time, and for a long period of time, it was not criticized. And the cities where we had a lot of skyscrapers seemed to be very cool and progressive, but at some moment of time it became a cliche that the high buildings trigger some problems. Of course, it's not right. Of course, it's just a prejudice. And I think it's something which is a rooted rumor, actually, that something spoils something or impacts transportation. Of course, it's not true. And when we speak about urban density, we need to understand how we can educate people to change their attitude. And probably I would like to return back to the nature of those cliches, that Moscow, when they started to build skyscrapers at the beginning of 2000s, this time coincided with a very serious transport collapse when we had big issues with our traffic. But it's not something due to the skyscrapers construction. It's just a coincidence, and we need to improve our infrastructure and to do better city planning, because we may develop both directions and it won't interfere. And I think that the correspondence of those two events probably became the root for such an opinion that skyscrapers are related with the transportation problems. That's why we need to use firework to burn them as if they were alchemists in medieval ages. But this is just prejudice. I think that we need to educate people, demonstrate good examples, explain it during discussions as this one, for example, and I'm sure that we will have the audience which will hear us. And I think that skyscrapers do not spoil anything. It's totally wrong. It's a great engineering phenomena. And we already explained what's good in that and what's useful. Yes, I would also like to support the standpoint of Sergey Olegovich. I would like to proceed with the technical example. For example, in a skyscraper, we may have 500 families living, and 70-storied building may have, for example, 200 families. And to make sure that we may locate the same number of families, but in the buildings which are 3 times lower, you need to increase the number of roads in 5 times. That means that the children of those people will have to pass a 5 times longer way to get, for example, to a school or to a polyclinic. That means that they will have to go further to get to a metro station or to a recreational area. And if we have a higher building, then we do not spend our time, our life on the road. You need to live like 15 minutes only away from the point where you can work or do something. Do we have any questions from our audience? If not, then I would like to return back to avant-garde mentioned by Sergey. And we have a good book that is called Culture.2. And that book suggests that it's also a kind of a war of egos. Who's better, who is higher, and so on and so forth. Do you think it's still relevant now? And Alexander Gusev wrote a great book, and I liked the author, and we even contributed to the publishment of the book. And this is called Language of Templates or Prejudices. And I think this is a great book concerning urbanite construction, but I think that each should have his or her own opinion, and we should always doubt the opinions of other people, even if they are experts. And to say that all the high-rising buildings were created only for the economical purposes, that's wrong. Of course, some of the skyscrapers were constructed to show up, to demonstrate something to somebody, but I think we should not tell that everything is the same and everything reaches the same goal. And once again, the analytics of successful cities will demonstrate that when we speak about the skyscrapers, we use them as a tool. And even Zurich, you saw the presentation, and Zurich, which is associated with the low-storied buildings, historical maybe, somewhere near the lake, but even Zurich is currently finding the place for the skyscrapers, even under such conditions. That's why I totally disagree that it's about ego and ambitions. But probably if we have Bologna, for example, and if we have San Gimignano and those towers where owners competed, which tower is higher or bigger? Yes, we did have such examples, but still they had a very good functional logic behind it as well. And it's very good to analyze it. It's useful. So I think it's just a cliche, it's just a prejudice, it's common words, but it's quite popular because sometimes we see that people like to demonstrate something big, what they own. And once again, I would reiterate, we should not think so. It doesn't work like that. Yes, I totally support the words of Sergei Olegovich. I never saw, neither in Moscow nor in Russia, the idea that architects or designers would suggest to have 5 stories more just out of their ambitions. Well, actually, the art of architecture and how architecture became a separate part, a part which is not construction and development. The idea was that people liked the place where they live, and now we live in different cities, and they're different because we have beautiful architecture. It's not a product. It's not something what we can see in the suburban areas, for example, where we have similar, absolutely identical premises. And actually, when we speak about high-rising buildings, it's not simply technology, it's not just a place to live, it's also art. And I would say that people like something which is extraordinary in cities. I doubt that somebody would say that my own suburban part of the city is the best one. I like all those identical buildings, and this is the best part of my town or city. I am sure that we may use the skyscrapers, we may use their architecture. I don't think it's about ego. And by the way, ego is not so bad. And we can also have a look at the number of stories in Moscow buildings, and we may calculate how many selfies and photographs are done against the background of Moscow city. That will be clear then what are the background.
Do you have time for another comment?
К нам пытается подключиться.
Is somebody going to... So, Christos is on the screen. Yes, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to contribute to this conversation because I'm also a lover of the ideas of the suburbia, but I also do love the kind of the energy and the intensity that towers bring to a city like New York, to a city like Moscow, to a city like Los Angeles or other world cities. And I think in all the conversation today, I noticed that we discussed all the issues, and I support, of course, my co-speakers here, but we shouldn't forget a very fundamental and abstract fact that skyscrapers are very good at multiplying the land in which they rest on, and therefore they liberate a lot of the natural landscape around them by building floors on top of one another. And as a mechanism, I think especially for urban centers where land is very scarce, potentially also very expensive, they're very effective instruments for creating volume without necessarily occupying a lot of land. Think about this. Can you imagine a city, and Moscow does have that challenge at some point, that expands in so many hundreds of square kilometers that it becomes endless, a little bit like Los Angeles, that you get lost in an endless labyrinth of low-rise 2- or 3-story buildings. That is also not the way. And because I think this argument is clear, I would like to suggest that this question shouldn't be so black and white. It shouldn't be skyscrapers, yes or no. No, I don't think that's the right way to phrase the question. I think there can be all sorts of different types of buildings, and that's what makes cities rich. When we go in a forest, you don't look at tall trees and say, well, why do we have tall trees here hiding the sky? Why do we not only have bushes? A forest has trees of all sorts of different sizes and shapes and forms, and the city needs to have some of that diversity. That's what I would like to say.
Большое спасибо, Christos.
Christos, thank you so much for your comment. I would like to thank all the participants. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. Unfortunately, we still have questions. Thank Kenneth, thank Alexei, thanks to everyone who listened to us. I would like to thank the organizers and wish great future to big cities. And I would also like to separately thank Christos and Zaha Hadid Bureau. I would like to thank for the knowledge and ideas we are going to construct further and implement them.